following program on Ada Derana 24 is classified for general audience. It is intended for all ages. It contains little or no violence, no strong language, and little or no sexual dialogue or situations. The following program contains opinions of the participants and does not reflect the views and beliefs of the Derana Media Network. The network believes in a safe space for all ideas to be expressed and on its duty to create such a platform for free speech. Viewer discretion is strictly advised. For a real view, real opinion, and for an honest conversation, it's time to Get Real with Mahieash Johnney. Tonight, coming to you from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Get Real, where we speak to notable newsmakers here at home and also from all around the world. We tonight have a very special guest. And a very special subject. I think we've been talking about, there was a series which we did several months back with regard to digitizing Sri Lanka. Now that is a beast itself that we not have been able to tame to a certain extent, but we've been trying since 2015. There's a lot of effort that has undergone towards this particular side of things, and even the current president. One of his key tasks, he said, and election promises he kept, was to make sure that Sri Lanka becomes digitized under his administration. Well, joining me tonight is the CEO of Surge Global Banuka Harischandra. Welcome to the program. Good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Do you share the same sentiment, like we've been trying to crack this egg called digitizing the country?
Look, I think all of us are kind of on that bandwagon, hoping that it happens sooner rather than later. But at the same time, having been in the space of digital transformation, we also understand the challenge of it. There's a lot of those things that need to be done kind of at an infrastructure level before digitization can happen, because it's very rarely an issue around technology. The technology, in 99% of the cases, it's already there. It's not that we have to innovate anything, it's not that we have to build anything, it's just how do we get everyone on board? And that is fundamentally the challenge that needs to be solved in order to ensure that digitization happens.
In terms of, let's talk about a little bit beyond Sri Lanka globally. Your company deals with a lot of international clientele, and you see the lot of changes that is occurring in comparison. What is happening out there and where we are? How would you do that comparison?
So it's tricky, right? To give credit to Sri Lanka, though we are still developing in our digitization process, we are still ahead of a few, but behind many. And
in what instance?
So if you look at, so we work with kind of two spectrums of business. We work with the private sector as well as the government sector. In terms of the government sector, we work primarily with governments in the Middle East in terms of their kind of government digitization process, as well as in the private sector, we work with kind of tier one nations like the US that have gone kind of significantly ahead in the digital kind of roadmaps. And then we also work with kind of Pacific islands like Papua New Guinea and countries that are significantly behind where Sri Lanka is today. So I think really the challenge that, at least my point of view, that I see is that there are key ramps which allow digitization to be effective. And until those ramps have been fundamentally solved, digitization is a challenge.
What are those ramps?
So three things, and I think I've kind of touted this as many times as I possibly could to everyone who asks it. Technology requires infrastructure at the core. The infrastructure is, the first step is electricity. In the event that you don't have access to electricity, you cannot digitize. The digital transformation journey stops as, like, your total addressable market shrinks. The next phase of it is connectivity, which is access to the internet. Without stable access to the internet, then the digitization program shrinks again to those who have access to electricity, internet. And then the third part that people don't really think about is the ability to access or communicate in the English language. Whether we like to or not, technology today primarily is built around the English language. Now, there are instances where they have native components, they are translated to different languages, you have things in ways that you can understand, but at its core, those three ramps are necessary for us to be able to go through this digitization journey. No matter how much time, energy, effort you put in the underlying technology, the stakeholder management, the change management, until those three key ramps are built, you can't digitize a country.
So let's talk about those three areas. You said infrastructure. Now, infrastructure, electricity, and then the accessibility to the internet, those two areas. Where's Sri Lanka?
We are getting better.
And infrastructure per se, what exactly are you talking about?
So,
are you talking about the connectivity process?
I mean, if you look at Sri Lanka's electricity connectivity, right, like we're still not at 100%. There are areas around the country. We are, at least from an electricity point of view, we're probably closest to bridging that gap there. But if you look at kind of stable connectivity, we do have something like over 100% penetration on smartphones. But if you look at something like social media access or broadband connections, I think the last time I checked, this is probably about a few years ago, Sri Lanka's internet connectivity is like 30-35%, which is not terrible, but it's not great in terms of enabling core services to people, right?
But that's the thing. Now, the internet penetration doesn't necessarily means it's transferring everything into dollars. That'll basically aid. Let's forget about the bigger picture of the economy of the nation. Let's talk about an individual's life enhancement. Utilization of technology would actually lead towards a better life quality. So in a situation like that, do you think have we even thought in that direction to make sure, because social media access and all that thing it's a feel good thing?
No. What I meant by that is not necessarily someone's ability to get on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
It's the ability for an individual to have an identity and a consistent access online. Whether it's used for social media, communication, or interaction with the government is a completely separate thing. If you look at, for example, let's take a real world scenario. You want to buy a vehicle, you want to get your, or you want to kind of access some sort of government service, you need to get your ID renewed. If you don't have an email address, you can't log into a system. And if you don't have kind of consistent access to that type of technology, then the services that can be built around digitization is inherently going to be slowed down. Now, there are layers to this penetration. There's a layer of allowing technology within government to enable government to do its own tasks faster. And then there's a secondary layer where that government interfaces with the public, which is where that real adoption and that real kind of process happens, is your ability to file your taxes online, your ability to kind of, I know GovPay launched this quite recently, and they're trying to add as many services as possible. Now, you can have millions of these services, but if the end user, the citizen, is unable to understand these services and use it in a consistent way, you're not really adding value to the entire economy.
The other thing that I want to get your opinion on, the digital literacy. In terms of, we know the younger generation is quite well understanding of these entire systems and things like that, but then again the decision making market is on the older side of things when it comes to the age spectrum. So for them, hard cash is what they look for, not the digital version of it. So in a situation like that, the digital literacy is another challenge that keeps coming up, popping up. Because 2015, I remember the same thing. The GovPay came in a different version back then, and when that happened, first thing that they were talking about is like apparently people are not using it because they don't understand it.
Yes.
So in a situation like that, how do we get around that barrier?
So when technology is deployed, so we are doing a series of projects at the moment with different players. The largest cost element in any budget for a technology development program is not the actual development of the project, it's the adoption. Usually some governments we work with, for every dollar they spent on development, they spend about $5 to $10 ensuring that people understand what is it that they built and how do we communicate it with the rest of the population so that they can actually use the infrastructure. And forget governments, right? Imagine you're launching a company. If you're launching an app, a startup or something, most of the money in the early stage is actually not going towards engineering cost of building the app unless people figure it out, you have this amazing product market fit. The money is going towards communicating to your potential customers that you exist and this is how the product is used and what it can do for you.
That's a huge beast.
It is.
In order to get around.
And so the problem is you can spend infinite amounts of money and still not crack it if the ramps are not there, right? So it's a balancing act that you need to do of ensuring that the critical infrastructure is there, which is the access to the internet, electricity. They need to have access to technology. They need to be able to communicate with that technology, and primarily in English. And then the reason I kind of harp on the English language is because we talk about looking at the world around us from an education point of view and converting that to Sinhala so that people can learn in Sinhala. But the problem with education is that it changes so rapidly. You have the entire world producing all this content around us. You actually don't need to re-engineer the wheel. You just need to get the populace to understand what is happening, and that's a language barrier. If you're able to do that, then it's just a matter of getting people to, the technology that's being built needs to be built intuitively. You can't have, the majority of technology that is being used by Sri Lankans is actually social media. People know how to use WhatsApp, people know how to use Facebook, people know how to use their email accounts to large degrees. When we launch apps as governments, the quality standard, the user experience needs to match those kind of intuitive experiences that are global standards. We can't just create a list and expect people to figure it out because they're used to essentially best-in-class software. So when they're used to only adopting technology in the likes of kind of these amazing experiences, and then they go to something that hasn't really been thought through, minus a small echo chamber of people that are deciding what the functions are, it kind of starts to fall apart.
Good example is this whole implementation of the passport mechanism system that QR codes and on online appointments, and it still has not even.
And it's not even difficult, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
The first so when
so that's the question that I wanted to ask you. Now, in a situation like that, that's the most simplest thing. Okay, getting a system. I don't think we need a huge pay a huge company. There'll be plenty of within the government you can find people who can actually create this system. Why does this stuff keeps going wrong?
The decision makers are. I'll take a really good example. When you sell software to an enterprise versus a consumer, the journey is very different. When you sell enterprise software, the decision makers are typically a large group of people that are comparing the features that you have to the features that someone else has. And they decide more features is better, right? That's because they are buying something with a large amount of money and they want best value for their money. When you're selling to a consumer, they actually couldn't care less about the features. The only thing that the consumer cares about is, how does this look, how does this feel, and can this do what I want it to do? And they're judging it based on the ease of use. And here's the problem. We look at everything from that kind of enterprise-led space where it's a series of features. And the decision makers across the board, right, does not have the competency around design and experience, which is unfortunately the single most important thing when it comes to deploying government technology, or deploying any technology for that matter, because there's no point building an incredibly comprehensive tool that no one knows how to use. The most simplest way that companies encourage people to use complex tools is they do a video tutorial explaining the steps. It can be a 10-15 minute YouTube video explaining how does this actually work, how do I fill these forms in, right? Like right now, no one knows how to file their taxes. There is a tax form that comes out, and the government has yet not made a single video saying, hey, this is me, my name is so-and-so, I made this much money, here's an example of me filing the taxes. Take the tax form, show it being written down so they're not afraid of what the tax file looks like. Because, 2 million or 1 million tax accounts or something, the other 10, 15 million working people have never seen the file. And how are we expecting everyone to figure it out by themselves, and we're not even spending a little bit of time and energy hand-holding?
You said you work with government organizations in the Middle East and all. I'm pretty sure they are very advanced in terms of utilizing technology in their systems and basically, making sure that their citizens, have the ease of usage of these kinds of services. What are they doing right and what are we not doing?
They budget for design, right? Like a serious budgets for design, because they have understood that it is important to get adoption. The KPIs around the work that is being deployed have KPIs around adoption. So it's not like, does this system work? Yes, no. What is the daily active users on the system? How many minutes within the system is being spent? So they know that it is a successful launch and not a launch, right? And then the next part is the kind of allocation of capital towards advocacy, awareness, education, right? We consider the deployment of technology the completion of the project. The more mature markets understand that the deployment is not necessarily correlated to success. Success is the usage of the product, when the outcomes are being met, right? So, example, if you're looking at a passport renewal system, it's the number of passports that are being submitted through the system and the time each person is spending, and if that is reducing, that's a great KPI, right? Like, that's what you're looking at. It doesn't matter if the system is there and it potentially works if no one is using it, or the same group of people are using it, or you have these little agencies that are built around the complexity of using it, so that there's another entire business built around charging kind of end consumers to use the system on their behalf because the system is so complicated. And I think we don't put enough thought around that system.
Talking about the passport office system, actually many times I have tried to utilize it and to say there is no, you can get a new passport, but there is not one single tab that says, okay, this is the place to go to renew your passports, which is most of the time whenever a local guy is going for it, it could be for renewal.
And it's not hard to find out. If you kind of reverse search the number of queries that come up for any of these things, you'll understand what the people are looking for.
Exactly.
And the problem is that is a UX requirement, right? That's a user experience audit. It is not included in any of the way our tenders are built. It's not really considered. It is an afterthought, a check mark that says, have you considered XYZ? And then you say yes, and then you're done. It's not a strategic exercise. It is an add-on to an existing proposal.
You think we have to take a short break, but before that, do you think that in terms of Sri Lanka's, let's take the government side of things, because that is the entity that impacts most of the people of this nation. So do you think they have actually do you see any kind of indicators saying that, okay, this is a step in the right direction?
I have seen indicators. I have spoken to people that are involved in the design of these or launch of these implementations.
Are you talking about current ones or
current ones?
Yeah, okay.
And they have assured me that it is something that they're going to consider. The problem with design and the problem with all of these things is it's a subjective exercise. It is very nuanced, and how do you price design differently, and when it comes to government and procurement, these things then start to get very complicated. So I understand the issue that they're facing, but at the same time, if we don't set those minimum standards, there's no point of doing the digital transformation, because you will end up deploying technology that no one really wants to use.
Exactly. I think that is the case since 2015. There is a lot of work that has been done on this field, but then again, utilization is at its bare minimum. Let's take a short commercial break. I'm in conversation with the CEO of Surge Global, Banuka Harischandra. We'll be right back. This is Get Real. Everyone, to Get Real, I'm in conversation with Banuka Harischandra, the CEO of Surge Global. We've been talking about digitization process here in Sri Lanka, and also, of course, the progress it has made all around the world. Banuka, one of the things that I think last time when you were here on State of the Nation, which you actually spoke about, is the ease of doing business here in Sri Lanka in terms for digital markets, digital businesses per se. So before we get into all the details, but what is the biggest issue that you see of getting, because we've been talking about this, it's IT sector that you can keep develop, lots of money can come in, all that, and India is cracking that. But here we're still talking, struggling and doing all that. What do you think is the issue here?
So I think that's two separate questions. One is around bringing investment into the country, and then the next one is around the IT sector specifically. When it comes to bringing capital into the country, I think it's a very straightforward thing, right? Investors deploy capital for return, and they try to maximize return and minimize risk. There are kind of pockets of opportunity for return in Sri Lanka, but the problem is it's very difficult for an investor externally that has not spent time and energy in this country to quantify the risk that they're signing up for.
Example? Well,
the biggest example is, I would go back to policy. I think I kind of harp on this thing all the time. Investors are totally fine taking risk. They are totally fine paying their taxes. They are okay taking long-term stances within a country as long as they know what they're signing up for. The issue today is that it's very difficult for them to predict what they're signing up for. Now, understandably, that is part of the risk of an emerging market, is that things change. And that is kind of this negative feedback loop we keep on falling into, where the worse off, similar to like the worse off your credit is, the more expensive credit becomes. But unfortunately, that's when you want the cheapest credit, right? And the more money you have, the more money that's available to you. A very easy way, if we can find a way around it, is to showcase and consistently communicate what the long tail policy is supposed to be, so that investors can potentially adjust their expected risk over those periods of time. For example, if you look at the sector of if you look at the sectors around taxation, what should our standard taxes be? Why do some people have crazy tax holidays and everyone else pay a different amount? How does one get there? How does one stay away from it? When money enters the country, is it safe for it to return back after periods of time? What does that look like? Are there restrictions that can be imposed? Are they removed? And I think without a sense of visibility and a sense of trust, it becomes tougher and tougher. I think the good thing about the country over the last couple of years is that we have started to regain a sense of credibility. But I don't think it's a very cautious optimism at the moment, and I think investment will start flowing in when that cautiousness reduces.
Let's forget about the fact that you're a Sri Lankan. Just let's think you're a businessman. Would you invest in Sri Lanka?
If I remove myself from the current situation, it's tricky, right? Because I would assume I have a large swath of capital. If I have too much money, I would probably take an investment in Sri Lanka, where if I'm like a sovereign wealth fund that is doing kind of this large-scale sector-based thing, and I want to take a equity position across all the public markets, for sure. If I am an investor with,
let's say, IT?
Yeah, look, I think if you're doing investments in technology, I would not invest in the technology in Sri Lanka. I would utilize the resources in Sri Lanka. I would find.
Tell why.
One is that a technology business is a very intangible thing. It is at its core, an intellectual property that is built in a specific area, powered by groups of people that are somewhat distributed. They may be in a location, they may not, and powered by essentially servers in physical spaces that are also kind of unrelated to the location, right? When we build a product in Sri Lanka, our servers are not in Sri Lanka, and sometimes our teams are also not in Sri Lanka. So the benefit of housing the business is an upside where you're basically saying you're protecting this intellectual property. Now, when I'm doing that, I am subjected to the governance and the regulations that the country provides. And I am then looking at, okay, what is my upside and what is my downside, right? Very straightforward pros and cons. I can list a whole bunch of cons. I can't list a single pro as to what the benefit is. If I look at raising capital, it's incredibly difficult to raise capital for a technology company in Sri Lanka, because no one, you build a company to either list it or to sell it. It's difficult to list it in Sri Lanka because we don't have liquid markets, and the value is not going to get truly realized. And you can't sell a Sri Lankan business the way I can sell a business in Singapore or the US. So if it's a technology company, it's not even a tax conversation. I'd probably register it today in the US, because the terminal buyer...
So the reason why I asked that was, this is exactly where we need to hit on, and to make sure that we change those kinds of areas rather than going around in circles, which many administrations have actually gone through in terms of trying to get investors here, but nobody's coming. So in a situation like that, what would you advise the government? Like, now, okay, this is a new administration. Let's take it as a fresh perspective and ask them, okay, listen, you want investment, A, B, C, D would be your priority number one, priority number two in a situation like that.
Can I make what I would consider an honest assessment?
Yeah.
I think building intellectual property, driving that IP out into Sri Lanka to hold the intellectual property, I think is a bit of a lost cause, right? Like, forget Sri Lanka. No technology company today that is serious will start in Europe, because it's a regulatory mess, and there's no benefit of doing that. So, and there are all the benefits, and right now it's kind of concentrated across the US, perhaps Singapore, and those two countries drive a lot of that kind of new innovation.
So what can we change here to be like that?
I mean, it's if you look at those specific markets, it's access to capital, right? You can't sell the business once it's here. And that is such a large terminal risk, right? If my valuation is going to change by a factor of 3, just based on where it is, despite the fundamentals of the business, why would I set it up here? I can sell it for 9 times revenue in the US, but because it's Sri Lanka, it's being priced at 3 times revenue. Same business, same people, same thing. And people assume it's a taxation thing. It's very rarely a taxation. You'd rather pay higher taxes in a market than the US. The US is a higher tax market than Singapore. Yeah. And yet it still makes more sense to do it in the US, purely because there is access to capital. You become more credible as an organization.
As a government, should the government be intervening in a situation where you provide access to capital per se, because that is basically getting the lower tier business entrepreneurs within this sector to get on board? So
I don't think the type of capital that is required, you need risk capital, right? One, I don't think governments are positioned to provide risk capital.
So where do you think it can come from?
I think eventually venture capital markets will develop, right? But venture capital markets won't develop until public markets develop. Public markets will not develop until broad economic development happens. Yeah. If government starts to enter into VC territory, I think you will have the largest degree of fraud Sri Lanka has ever seen, because you're essentially writing checks to people with ideas that may or may not be able to back their ideas, and you're accepting the fact that all that money could potentially be lost. I think it creates a beautiful corruption framework, because I can go ahead and say, oh, I need 10 billion rupees to do this harebrained idea. A year later, I come back and say, hey, it didn't work out, but I paid myself a 9 billion rupee salary.
Yeah. Interesting points indeed. In terms of, I know you're very much conversing with a lot of international entrepreneurs in terms of not just in the tech industry, but in various industries. Now, why I want to talk to you about this is I want to bring this example first. Now, take Indonesia for a simple example. Indonesia is basically little islands scattered all over Southeast Asia. And in a situation where they're like that, Apple is willing to invest more than 100 billion in that country. Now, I think it was a lower grade, and then they increased it. They got what they wanted. Why them and why not us?
Well, I think, to be fair on Apple, it's a massive population, right? Is
it a population issue only?
No, I don't think it's only a population issue, but I think it's easier to take a bet on a larger population than it is to take on a smaller one, right? Because Sri Lanka's population is inherently capped at the 2025. Like, it's very unlikely that it's going up. I think with migration and with the aging population, it'll start to go down. So it's difficult to drive economic development in that type of environment. And when you have Indonesia, that is...
But how is it difficult? If the numbers are small, then it has to be the easiest.
It's difficult to get a return on large capital deployed, right? If you look at India, you have domestic businesses that are servicing its local markets being worth billions of dollars based on sheer size. Indonesia has the same opportunity. And all these if you look at the superpowers that were built over the last couple of years, you can see the growth of India, you can see the growth of China. You saw before this whole turbulent situation with Bangladesh, it was a massively growing economy, and Indonesia has the same potential. So, Indonesia by size is nearly the same size as the US from a population point of view, right? 30% off. That's really interesting for someone to go ahead and park my money because it can grow with that economy, with that size. Sri Lanka does not provide the same opportunity. Does not mean that there aren't interesting opportunities to invest in Sri Lanka. Don't get me wrong, right?
No, that's where my second question comes. Singapore's model, Singapore doesn't have a sizable market.
Singapore figured out their niche.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So
Singapore's
what did they do there?
They're capital markets businesses, right? They are a financial hub, and they have remained as a financial and a trading stronghold for generations. They have said, this is who we are, this is what we do, here are the processes of working in Singapore, none of these will change, and they haven't for multiple decades. And they've built that trust over time. They didn't, day one, they said that this is how we hold ourselves in international business, international court. People didn't flock to Indonesia. They saw that to Singapore. Singapore put their money where their mouth is. And that kind of...
Is that the problem we have?
Absolutely. I am very confident that we cannot build that trust because we change our mind all the time, right? So we are considered high risk. And I think that's a fair consideration.
Changing wise?
Imagine
I mean, like, for us to change this, because we have to change this, we can't be going in this...
So, I mean, let's take where we are today, right? We have said, this is where Sri Lanka is. Sri Lanka wants to be a nation that is export heavy, and we will drive incentives towards that, right? Like right now, they have a baseline incentive. We will provide a reduced tax rate on exports compared to the import revenues taxes. And we are saying we want investment to come in. All you have to do now is maintain that. The question is, will we? We can't be wishy-washy around our stances in terms of policy. We can't be wishy-washy around what we let in, what we let out. We have to build kind of a very strong governance framework, stick to it, communicate to it, and demonstrate to the external world that this is what we're doing. We said that we are going to reduce our deficit in the budget. We are providing, we have a 1 million tax net, which, for the size of the economy, for the number of people we have, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Demonstrate to the world that you're improving it. Demonstrate that you are holding your legislative system up to standard. People that are corrupt, have been proven guilty, should be going to jail. All of these factors come in, right? It's good governance. And once you see this happening consistently over time and time and time, then you build trust. It's not this magic thing that you press a button and then suddenly everyone's like, oh, this is great. Like, you can't do that. In fact, if you do that, it actually has the reverse effect of it, where you realize that, oh, there are loopholes and there are kind of interesting ways to get around all of these things, and then you keep looking for those things, right? And when you look for those things, you find them. What you need to have is a unified message to say, this is what Sri Lanka is, this is what we do, and this is our role in the world. We can't be good at everything. And I think from a technology point of view, where are we good at? I don't think our technology story is going to be the next Silicon Valley, and I think that's a bit of a tricky one. The beauty of technology talent in Sri Lanka is we have good talent, right? Like the reason that we've been successful in our business is because of the availability of good talent. We should nurture it, we should make them stronger, we should give them infrastructure, resources for them to be able to cater to the rest of the world, whether it's through businesses or by themselves, working remote jobs, right? For those guys, they've built a pretty good quality of life here, and I think there's a lot more space in that type of industry than there is in the intellectual property space. I think Sri Lanka will build intellectual property for domestic solutions. I don't think Sri Lanka will build intellectual property for global solutions.
Yeah. Let's take a short commercial break. I'm in conversation with Banuka Harischandra, the CEO of Surge Global. We've been talking about digitizing Sri Lanka, its aspects, the business prospects, and also the opportunities we have as we move forward. There's a new government in place, and they're trying to crack the code on this as well. Hopefully, a lot of input that Banuka gave was very useful in terms of, thinking beyond the shores of Sri Lanka and making sure that Sri Lanka is a lucrative place for investors to come in. Let's take a short commercial break. You're watching Get Your Way Right. back, everyone, to Get Real Army Conversation with Banuka Harischandra, the CEO of Surge Global. Banuka, you've been talking about a lot of good ideas in terms for this current government to take in and actually make the necessary changes, because those viewpoints are coming. You as a business entrepreneur here in Sri Lanka. Let me talk about the future generations. Now, we've been talking about a lot about what's happening right now. You said the talent portion, where you said we have good talent here in terms for the IT sector, the technological sector. How are we to get those opportunities, not just, Colombo based or Colombo centralized, but then again, I'm pretty sure there is a lot of talent that we can harness all around the country. I know there is a lot of effort to making education digitizing as well. But in a situation where that is happening, how can we create a little bit of a stockpile of people who are geared towards this industry and the needs of the industry?
So I think when it comes to, so we'll break it into two, the entrepreneurship side and the technology side. I think the entrepreneurship side is more of an aspirational / inspirational thing that happens based off success that they see and hear, right? You see companies, pick me IPO, you see, and they're worth billions and billions of rupees now. The founders did really well financially. There are companies that sold, made a boatload of money, and I think that kind of economy drives a lot of people to look at it and go, I want to do that, right? And I think a lot more of those things need to happen. Good businesses need to be built, they need to be sold, ideas need to happen, and funding needs to go through. And I think that will naturally build a certain level of entrepreneurship culture. From a technology point of view, I think outside of Colombo, you still kind of run into those ramp issues, right? Because you can't educate them on these subjects until they have access to electricity, internet, and English. Once you have those things down, then it's the matter of providing the right I can't give enough detail on how to educate masses of people. That's not something that I'm particularly confident in explaining, but the role that if you provide the core infrastructure, even natural curiosity will push a lot of people significantly further. And if they see their peers doing well and successfully, they see those, they get the same level of drive, right? You see all these freelancers in different parts of the country that have made $1,000 or $100 on Fiverr and all of these things. And the first thing they do is they tell their friends. That specific action drives probably more growth than any sort of policy or anything that the government can do. But the government needs to play the role in ensuring that there's opportunity for that to happen, and when that happens, they can increase the likelihood of it happening again and again, right? So once you have infrastructure in place, once that investment happens, once there is kind of enough consistency around ensuring that the world looks at us in a favorable way, I think the rest of it will kind of happen by itself without us having to micromanage everything.
There is one area that I actually wanted to get your take on this. It also goes hand in hand with this whole concept of people reluctant towards digitizing themselves, especially in terms of their money, financial aspects of things, security per se. In terms of these governments who you all are working, I think security is a bigger concern for them as well. Do you think we're addressing it properly here, or many loopholes there?
I think there's plenty of issues around security, and I think it comes, even to begin the conversation, there's a whole bunch of issues around just a lack of awareness, right? You mentioned literacy. Financial literacy is near zero in large parts of the country. So we tend to fall prey to fraud because we don't know what the real thing looks like, right? and that education hasn't happened yet. And the institutions in charge aren't necessarily educating it because there isn't a large base to educate. So I think that will have to happen naturally with digital transformation. From an end consumer's point of view, they don't need to worry about, once you deposit your money in a bank, you're not worried that the bank gets hacked because it is essentially at its core insured. I think the frame, security is something that you need to take seriously, and I think education and awareness around it is really important. But it still comes back to that first piece, right? The advocacy and the awareness of whatever is being done online needs to carry through to the end user, which we don't do. Be it for how to do a specific government function online, to what to watch out for, what not to watch out for, what is true, what is fake, and that education needs to happen. And I think until that is happening and until we take that seriously, we run into both the issues of digital transformation being too challenging to implement, as well as during that process, people get caught up in so many different scams and frauds just because they can't identify what is real and what is not.
In terms of enhancing that particular portion, especially in the financial sector, what would you advise? Because there's a lot of conversation right now happening here in Sri Lanka with regard to money being scammed by a lot of individuals who really don't understand that.
But it's awareness, no? I think it's a lack of understanding of the core subject, right? Culturally, Sri Lanka does not talk about money. Your parents don't want to talk to you about money. It's a taboo subject. Your uncles and aunts don't want to talk about it. And then you're suddenly, as a child, expected to figure all of these things out on your own. And it puts you in a compromising situation. I think part of the reason we haven't even developed as a country is we don't like talking about money. It's seen as this evil thing. If I ask you how much you get paid on air, it's a very, do you want to answer that? What will other people think? Is that okay? Will they? It's such a taboo subject, right? And I think that probably is a root cause for all of these things. And when you don't talk about money, then naturally you don't understand how money works. So fraud, all of these things are rampant as a cultural issue there.
Is there hope?
Yes, I wouldn't be here and decide to spend the rest of my life in this country if I thought that there wasn't hope. The good thing.
And where do you see them?
So, if you look at the last 10 years, Sri Lanka has been through absolute chaos. We've had COVID, we've had literal kind of power struggles, we've had terrorist attacks, we've had the worst kind of things that could happen. And if I were to ask you today, what is your point of view around the next 10 years in comparison to the last 10 years? You'd probably go, I think it's definitely going to be better than the last 10 years. But if you look back economically on the last 10 years and look at the country around you, look at this, right? All these buildings that are out there on this stage are things that were built in the last 10 years, despite of all of those challenges. And you can see the quality of life for the majority of the population improving. Now, I know that 2022, 23, there has been certain kind of fluctuations in the wrong direction, but in a general sense, decade over decade, we've been doing remarkably well. So I think we have figured out a lot of our issues. We figured out a lot of core problems. We're working towards solving it, even though we haven't entirely. So it's fair for me to assume that the next 10, 20, 30 years are going to be significantly better than the last 10, 20, 30.
I think that is a very helpful place to end the conversation as well, Banuka. Appreciate you coming up and sharing your ideas in terms of the digital infrastructure and the digital space where Sri Lanka seems to be hoping to get a bigger bang for the buck this time around with this government. And everybody is promising it, but then again, putting it into perspective and giving a lot of advice. Appreciate it. Really come back again whenever you have the time.
Will do. Thank you, Mahieash, for having me. This has been really fun.
Indeed. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for you tonight. Thank you very much for my guest, Banuka Harischandra, the CEO of Surge Global. We'll be back again next week with another subject and with another interesting guest. See you there. Bye.
Last time you're gonna fool around with me. Hey, hey. Last time you're gonna let me down. Last time you're gonna fool around with me.